Hi, I'm Mina.
And I'm Yules.
Thanks for tuning in to Artificially Informed.
Welcome to the Deep Dive. This is where we cut through all that noise from the global headlines, trying to pull out the essential knowledge, the critical context, basically everything you need to get properly informed fast.
And yeah, our mission today is pretty huge. We're looking at a world that seems almost paradoxical, doesn't it?
It really does. On one side, you've got these incredible scientific leaps forward. I mean, we're finding out where the gold in your ring actually came from, cosmically speaking. But then you turn around and see these deeply polarizing fights over domestic policy and, frankly, some really dangerous international conflicts just digging in deeper.
It's a truly dizzying stack of sources we've waded through for this one. We're going from, the highest levels of astrophysics down to the absolute chaos at airport check-in counters. We're tracking the money from colliding neutron stars. We're looking at the big geopolitical moves around Palestine. And then there's this sudden huge change to skilled worker visas in the U.S. That's a lot.
It is a lot. So we've tried to synthesize it for you into maybe three major shockwaves, let's call them, that we really need to unpack.
Okay.
First, we'll dive into what looks like the next era of science breakthroughs, from quantum computing all the way to potential clues about life on Mars.
Then a sharp pivot.
Yeah, a very sharp pivot to geopolitics. Specifically, this growing global recognition of Palestine and the sort of escalating tension between NATO and Russia.
Right, that's critical.
And finally, we'll break down that volatile spot where U.S. domestic policy crashes into technology, especially this monumental, really sudden shift on the H-1B visas.
And some economic signals, too, from places like Pennsylvania, the U.S., and Germany.
Exactly.
And the goal here, it isn't just to give you a news summary. It's about providing the context, showing you the connections.
Right.
How these things that seem totally separate are actually linked.
Yeah, understanding the forces that are, speeding up science, but at the same time maybe slowing down global cooperation, that feels pretty crucial right now.
Absolutely. So where do we start?
Okay, let's unpack this. We're starting way up high, like cosmically high, right at the origin story for the universe's most valuable stuff. So first up is this piece of astrophysics research that honestly sounds almost like mythology. Gold, right? For centuries, it's driven economies' conflict. But where it actually comes from has been this stubborn puzzle. Now, new research is suggesting that creating these heavy elements, it's tied directly to the most elusive particles out there, neutrinos.
Yeah, and what's just fascinating here is the sheer raw extremity you need to synthesize elements heavier than iron. The normal fusion process in stars.
Yeah.
Stellar nucleosynthesis.
Right, that powers stars.
Well, that basically hits a wall at iron. Fusing iron actually consumes energy instead of releasing it. So to get past that barrier, to make things like gold and platinum, you need something
colossal,
something chaotic. It's called the rapid neutron capture process, or the R process.
And the R process, that only happens in these really extreme events, right? Like cosmic cataclysms.
Exactly. Think neutron star collisions. When two of those incredibly dense stars merge, they unleash this extraordinary flood of neutrons in just milliseconds. The environment is so dense that atomic nuclei just get hammered instantly by hundreds of neutrons.
Okay.
But the really new insight here, the key bit from this research, is the role neutrinos play in all that chaos.
Neutrinos, but they barely interact with anything. How do they influence it?
Well, that's the thing. They're tiny, almost massless. Yeah. But they're generated in such unbelievable quantities during the merger that they actually have a profound effect on the nuclear interactions happening.
How so?
They sort of act like a cosmic switch. See, neutrinos oscillate, they change flavors, and this oscillation subtly changes the dynamics of that neutron-rich soup.
Okay.
By tweaking the balance between protons and neutrons and the stuff that comes out, they shift the final elemental recipe. Instead of just making, say, lighter heavy elements, the neutrino interaction actually pushes the whole process towards creating the very heaviest ones, the gold, the platinum, those critical rare earth elements we need for all our tech.
So it connects this mind-bending astrophysics, these extreme events,
right out there in space,
directly to the physical resources that, underpin our whole global economy down here.
Precisely. It's a direct line.
That is an incredible realization. It really changes how you think about why these things are rare. Okay, so from the explosive birth of gold, let's shift perspective a bit. Let's look at the maybe quieter majesty of stars being born captured by the Hubble Space Telescope.
Yeah, we've got these stunning new observations of a galaxy called Messier 96, or M96. It's what's called an intermediate spiral galaxy, about 31 million light years away, so quite a distance.
31 million light years.
And Hubble's resolution, it's just incredible. It really highlights two main things here. First, the galaxy looks warped.
Right.
It's gravitationally distorted, asymmetrical.
You can actually see it being pulled.
Yeah, likely because of the tidal forces from its neighboring galaxies in what's called the Leo I group. It's not alone out there.
Right, it's interacting. And within that sort of twisted structure, you see something else.
You do. You see these vibrant rings of newly forming stars, real baby stars. And studying them in M96 gives astronomers really critical data. We get to watch how star formation gets triggered or maybe even suppressed by these external gravitational pulls in a galaxy that's actively being, well, messed with. It helps us model how galaxies evolve under stress, you know.
Yeah.
It's not always the smooth, perfect spiral we imagine. Hashtag tag 2 planetary science and astrobiology.
Okay, let's bring it a bit closer to home now. Still in space, but in our solar system. We need to talk about the Perseverance rover on Mars.
Ah, yes, Jezero Crater. The work there has really injected some new excitement into the search for signs of ancient Martian life, or at least habitability.
Now, Jezero Crater, that was picked by that's the National Aeronautics and Space Administration team, specifically because the geology suggested it used to be a lake bed, right? Billions of years ago.
Exactly. Possibly fed by a river system.
Yeah.
So, theoretically, the perfect spot to look for preserved signs of life, if it ever existed there.
And Perseverance seems to be delivering.
It really does.
Yeah.
The rovers managed to sample rocks that are rich in organic molecules, you know, the carbon-based building blocks of life.
Okay, organics, but that doesn't automatically mean life, right?
No, absolutely not. But here's the key context. These organics are found mixed in with specific minerals, things like clays and hydrated silica. And the way they're arranged, their spatial distribution within that mineral matrix, it strongly mimics patterns we see on Earth that are associated with life. Specifically, they're being described as potential biosignatures.
Potential biosignatures. Okay, so not definitive proof.
Not proof, no. But it's highly suggestive of metabolic activity, maybe from ancient microbes that use chemical energy sources, not sunlight. Think of it like finding a fingerprint at a scene.
Right.
You might find the chemical components elsewhere, maybe through non-living processes, but finding them organized in a way that points strongly towards biology, that makes these rock samples incredibly high-priority targets.
These are the ones they want to bring back to Earth eventually.
Exactly. These are destined for the future Mars sample return mission. That'll be the first time we can really analyze Martian rocks in labs here on Earth with all our best equipment. It's a huge deal.
And speaking of future missions, NASA is actually set to announce its new class of astronauts this week.
That's right. And right after that, there are key discussions scheduled about the Artemis II moon mission. That's the one aiming to send humans back into lunar orbit. Hopefully by 2024 still.
That feels like a really tight timeline.
It is a rapid timeline, yeah. The pressure's definitely on. Artemis II is that critical test flight, checking out the hardware, the procedures, everything needed before they attempt landings, and then eventually aim for Mars.
Wow. Okay, so lots happening off-world.
And just as a little celestial marker for today, we actually have the new moon eclipse of August 2025 happening. Just a timely reminder, maybe, that while we're out there chasing clues on Mars and figuring out where goals comes from, our own cosmic neighborhood keeps ticking along with these powerful, predictable cycles. Hashtag tag 3. Earthly breakthroughs and ecological warnings.
Okay, landing firmly back on Earth now. Let's look at some biological ingenuity found in, of all things, ants.
Yeah, researchers at Rockefeller University have figured out a genetic mechanism that helps explain why ants have such an extraordinarily precise sense of smell.
They're masters of chemical communication, aren't they? Using pheromones for everything.
Absolutely. Trail marking, recognizing nestmates, sounding alarms. It's all chemical. They have a huge toolkit of olfactory receptor genes to do this. But the breakthrough wasn't just finding the genes, it was understanding how they filter the signals.
Filtering, so it's about cutting out the noise, like trying to hear someone in a crowded room.
Exactly like that. It's all about the signal-to-noise ratio. When an ant needs to detect a really critical scent, let's say a specific alarm pheromone signaling danger, it does something clever.
What's that?
It selectively ramps up the activity of the one specific receptor gene needed for that scent.
Okay.
While simultaneously silencing the neighboring receptor genes right around it, genes that would pick up other irrelevant smells.
So it actively dampens the background chatter.
Precisely. It reduces the noise from every other scent molecule floating around.
Ooh.
That enhances the precision for detecting the important signal, makes foraging more efficient, and probably saves energy too, less metabolic costs from constantly processing every single smell.
That's actually genius and has implications beyond ants.
Oh, definitely. Understanding how they achieve this high signal-to-noise ratio gives us insights into how our own sense of smell evolved mammals use similar principles. And, maybe more excitingly, it gives us a blueprint for biomimetic design.
Like building better sensors.
Yeah, imagine building better artificial noses, chemical detectors, maybe even explosive detectors based on how ants fine-tune their sensing.
Fascinating. Okay, from the tiny world of ant genetics to giant stones, we have a major archaeological twist concerning one of the world's most iconic monuments, Stonehenge in England.
Yeah, this is a big one. For decades, a key part of Stonehenge, the altar stone, this 6-ton sandstone slab right at the center, was assumed to have come from Wales.
Which was already considered a huge logistical feat for Neolithic people, right? Moving that thing.
A massive feat, yes. But a recent study using geochemical fingerprinting just delivered a stunning reversal.
Okay, don't keep us in suspense. Where did it actually come from?
The analysis definitively matched the stone's chemistry to a quarry way up in northern Scotland.
Scotland. How far away is that?
Roughly 750 kilometers, or about 466 miles.
Whoa. Okay, wait. Moving a 6-ton stone 200 kilometers from Wales was impressive. Moving it 750 kilometers across ancient Britain. That's a whole different ballgame.
It completely shifts the narrative. Think about it, that journey might have involved sea travel or just a monumental effort of overland hauling by potentially thousands of people working in relays.
It suggests the people who built Stonehenge had incredibly sophisticated logistics organization.
Absolutely. And much broader cultural networks than we maybe gave them credit for. Networks spanning the entire island of Britain. It redefines their capabilities, their connections, maybe even their prestige trading systems.
That really forces a rethink of Neolithic society. Wow. Okay, but we need to pivot now, unfortunately, to a much more sobering story, a kind of silent crisis happening right now. And strangely, it brings us back to ants.
Yeah, this comes from DNA analysis of old ant specimens collected years ago in Fiji.
We started this segment with ant ingenuity, and we end with a warning about them. What did the DNA show?
It showed evidence of a staggering decline, nearly 80%. 80% of Fiji's native ant species are declining or have potentially disappeared.
80%. That's devastating.
It really is. And it seems to be a localized confirmation of this wider trend people are calling the insect apocalypse.
And the cause?
Overwhelmingly attributed to human activities. Habitat destruction, think agriculture, urbanization, combined with the introduction of aggressive, invasive ant species that outcompete the natives.
And this isn't just about Fiji, is it?
No, not at all. Insects make up something like 90% of all animal species on Earth. Ants, specifically, are vital ecological engineers. They aerate soil, they disperse seeds, they control pests.
So when you lose 80% of your native ant species in one place,
the whole island ecosystem gets destabilized. It's a really powerful, tangible warning sign of the broader biodiversity crisis, which sometimes gets lost behind the bigger headlines about climate change.
That is a tough reminder of our impact, even the unseen impacts. Okay. Let's jump straight into our next segment now. We're connecting the absolute cutting edge of technology with some very real and sometimes, frankly, catastrophic failures in the infrastructure we rely on every day.
Right. Let's start with a really significant achievement coming out of UNSW Sydney, the University of New South Wales in Australia. They seem to have cracked a major engineering problem in the race to build scalable quantum computers.
Okay, quantum computing. We know it relies on qubits, and the big challenge is always getting them to be stable, getting them to talk to each other without falling apart instantly, right? Decoherence.
Exactly. And silicon is the dream material because, well, we already know how to manufacture silicon chips cheaply and at massive scale for classical computers. But making stable quantum bits in silicon has been incredibly difficult.
So what's the breakthrough?
They've found a way to let the atomic nuclei within the silicon chip, which have a quantum property called spin, communicate directly with each other, using the electrons that orbit them.
Ah, so the electron acts like a bridge.
Essentially, yes.
Yeah.
It acts as a communication channel, allowing two silicon nuclei qubits to become entangled, linked quantum mechanically.
And why is that so crucial?
Because it lets them maintain that entanglement, which you absolutely need for quantum calculations, while still operating within the existing framework of semiconductor manufacturing.
Yeah.
You know, the CMOS standards, complementary metal oxide semiconductor that we use for all our current chips.
So this means we're potentially a big step closer to building practical, large-scale quantum computers.
It's the hope.
That could actually leverage the trillions of dollars already invested in semiconductor factories.
Precisely. It could massively accelerate things like drug discovery, material science, bright complex codes, potentially revolutionary stuff.
Okay, that's huge on the computing front. Now, shifting gears slightly to material science, there was also news about a new kind of plastic.
Yes, a research team developed a new polymer, a type of plastic that undergoes a complete structural transformation when you expose it to specific wavelengths of light.
A complete transformation, not just like changing color.
No, much more fundamental. The material actually alters its molecular configuration. Its basic structure changes.
Wow. What are the potential applications for something like that? It sounds pretty niche.
It is niche and definitely experimental right now, yeah. But think long term. Imagine materials that need to adapt instantly to their environment.
Like?
Maybe dynamic building materials that could change their shape or density on command, self-healing coatings for cars or electronics, or in advanced manufacturing, using light as a super precise tool to build complex 3D structures layer by changing the material properties exactly where you need to.
So it hints at a future where materials aren't just static things, but are actually dynamic participants.
Exactly. It's a glimpse of possibilities. #2 cyber chaos at critical infrastructure.
Okay, but now we have to pivot to how alarmingly vulnerable our current global infrastructure is, even as all this cool new tech is emerging. Over the weekend, major airports across Europe were just thrown into chaos by a cyber attack.
Yeah, this was really extensive disruption. We're talking huge hubs like London Heathrow in the UK, Brussels in Belgium, Berlin in Germany, all hit hard.
And the target wasn't the airports themselves exactly.
No, and that's what highlights a critical weakness. The target was a third-party provider. The attack hit the systems run by Collins Aerospace, specifically their MUSE check-in and baggage handling systems.
Okay, let's pause there. MUSE, what exactly is that? Why was hitting it so disruptive?
Right. MUSE stands for Multiple User System Environment. Think of it as a sophisticated shared software platform that dozens and dozens of airlines and airports all rely on globally.
For really crucial stuff.
Absolutely mission-critical tasks. Passenger check-in, printing boarding passes, routing baggage correctly, the core operations. Because so many different companies use this one system from Collins Aerospace. When they got hit, the fallout was immediate and just cascaded across the continent.
Right. Hundreds of flights delayed, canceled, airports forced to go back to manual check-in. With paper.
Completely manual. Paper processes, handwriting bag tags. It's a really vivid and frankly terrifying illustration of how hitting just one critical technology supplier can essentially seize up a huge part of the global travel network.
And do we know who did it?
Investigators are scrambling. Speculation is flying. Would be state-sponsored hackers, could be sophisticated criminal gangs after ransom. But whoever it was, the implication is crystal clear. Our critical infrastructure resilience is only as strong as the weakest link in the supply chain. And often, that weakest link is a shared IT vendor that everyone relies on.
Wow. Okay. And as if European air travel wasn't messy enough, there was a separate issue in the U.S., right? The FAA, the Federal Aviation Administration, had a problem.
Yeah, a separate incident, but causing similar disruption. They had ground stops at major airports in the Dallas, Texas area, DFW, and Love Field.
What happened there?
That seemed to be linked to a failure in telecommunications equipment, something that impacted radar systems and communication for air traffic controllers. So not a cyber attack as far as we know, but still a critical system failure.
But having two major system failures hitting global aviation, one cyber, one technical, so close together.
It really underscores the strain, doesn't it? And maybe the potential fragility of some of this critical infrastructure, whether it's aging or maybe just not defended well enough against modern threats. #3, manufacturing and mobility shifts.
Okay, let's shift now to the future of manufacturing. China is clearly taking notes from recent problems elsewhere. You know, like that incident with the missing bolts on the Boeing 737-9 MAX plane.
Seems so. They're showcasing the technology inside the new smart factory they've built for their own domestically developed passenger jet, the C919.
The C919, right. That's their big push to compete with Airbus and Boeing. So what's so smart about this factory?
Well, they're really leveraging cutting-edge tech, aiming for basically zero-defect manufacturing.
Yeah.
The core of it is an extensive 5G-enabled industrial network throughout the factory.
Okay, 5G on the factory floor. What does that actually let them do?
In practical terms, it means almost every tool, every component carrier, every part is fitted with sensors and monitored in real time over this high-speed 5G network.
Constant feedback.
Constant high-speed data feedback. So if a technician uses the wrong amount of torque on a bolt, or maybe tries to install a part in the wrong sequence, the system flags it immediately.
Ah, so it's designed to catch human error right at the source, before the plane gets assembled.
Exactly. It's designed to prevent the kind of oversight that can lead to potentially catastrophic failures down the line, like those missing bolts. It's a very aggressive technological move to build confidence in their new plane by making quality control almost entirely digitized and automated.
That's a powerful strategy as they try to carve out a bigger piece of the global aviation market. Okay, speaking of high-tech moving things, the robo-taxi race seems to be really heating up in the U.S.
Oh, absolutely. We're seeing these key battlegrounds emerge. Dallas and Austin in Texas seem to be major hubs right now. You've got companies like Waymo, that's Google's spinoff, Uber, Tesla, all competing fiercely.
And Waymo's making moves.
Yeah, Waymo, for instance, is partnering up notably with a rental car company, Avis, to actually launch paid robotaxi services in Dallas, aiming for late 2026. So moving beyond just testing.
The promise is obviously huge, right? Less traffic, maybe lower pollution, better transport for people who can't drive.
The potential benefits are definitely attractive, yeah.
What the reality seems complicated. There are still big hurdles.
Huge hurdles. Regulation is probably the biggest one. Who's liable if a robotaxi crashes? How do cities even manage traffic flow when some percentage of cars are driven by algorithms? That's a massive challenge.
And just public acceptance, right? Are people ready to trust driverless cars?
That's the other major piece. Public trust is still fragile, even though some early data suggests that when operating within their designed limits, these robotaxi services might actually have lower accident rates than human drivers. But yeah, the technology is moving incredibly fast, much faster than the slow, often bureaucratic process of updating laws, infrastructure, and just general public comfort levels.
And that tension, rapid tech progress slamming into slow-moving policy and public trust that feels like it defines so much right now. And nothing really exemplifies slow-moving, politically charged policy quite like our next segment on global flashpoints.
Yeah, we are definitely witnessing a major shift, perhaps the most significant diplomatic shift regarding the Middle East conflict in years. There's this rising tide of international recognition for Palestinian statehood.
This feels monumental, especially the timing and who's involved. Just ahead of the UN General Assembly, you've got countries like the United Kingdom under Prime Minister Keir Starmer, plus Portugal, Canada, Australia, all officially stating they intend to recognize Palestine as a state.
And the UK one is particularly notable, isn't it?
Hugely notable. It's a real pressure point, especially coming from a traditional, long-standing ally of Israel like the UK. It marks a significant divergence from their historical position.
And Starmer's motivation seems pretty clear, right? It serves a purpose both at home and abroad.
Seems like it. Domestically, it aligns his Labour Party with international calls for a two-state solution. Internationally, it applies pretty direct diplomatic pressure, presumably for an immediate sustained ceasefire given the ongoing crisis in Gaza. It feels like a calculated political move acknowledging just how bad the humanitarian situation has become.
Unsurprisingly, the reaction from Israel, from Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, was immediate and very strong.
Yeah, he publicly called this collective recognition an absurd prize for terrorism. His argument is that it essentially rewards militant actions and undermines Israeli security without actually guaranteeing any stability in return.
And this whole diplomatic wave immediately throws a spotlight onto a really critical internal Palestinian question, doesn't it? Well, who would actually lead this newly recognized state?
Right.
You've got aging leadership figures, deep divisions that persist between the Palestinian Authority in the West Bank and Hamas in Gaza. The international community is trying to define the state's borders, but they're navigating a real vacuum when it comes to unified governance on the Palestinian side.
And the humanitarian backdrop driving all this pressure, it just can't be ignored, the situation in Gaza.
It's catastrophic. UNRWA, that's the UN Agency for Palestine Refugees, they're reporting thousands upon thousands fleeing what they call death and devastation in northern Gaza, desperately trying to move south, facing just unimaginable conditions.
And the cost of just trying to escape.
It's become prohibitive for most people. Reports suggest it's averaging over $3,000 per family, now around $3,180. People just don't have that. So countless families are forced to risk traveling on foot through incredibly dangerous areas.
And on top of that, there are reports of aid being stolen.
Yeah, deeply concerning reports from UNICEF, the UN Children's Fund, about thefts of crucial food supplies. Supplies meant specifically for malnourished children. It just underscores how urgent it is to get reliable, secure aid corridors established and protected.
And then just adding to the tragedy and the tension, there was that incident on the border with Lebanon.
Right, an Israeli drone strike in southern Lebanon in a town called Bint Jbeil. It killed 5 people.
And tragically, among them were American citizens.
Yes, 3 American children and their father were killed in that strike. It immediately spiked international tensions. Lebanese political leaders condemned it as a massacre, a crime against civilians. Israel maintained the target was a high-value Hezbollah operative.
But incidents like that, especially involving foreign nationals, they carry this enormous risk of the conflict spilling over much wider, right?
Yeah.
Especially when fragile truces have been negotiated before.
Exactly. It puts enormous strain on regional stability.
Yeah.
#TAG2, U.S.-China rivalry and Russian aggression.
Okay, shifting focus now to the dynamics between the major global powers. President Trump in the U.S. has revived a really contentious demand concerning Bagram Air Base in Afghanistan.
Yeah, the base the U.S. abandoned back in 2021 during the withdrawal.
Right. And Trump's demand was pretty blunt.
Extremely blunt. Publicly demanded the base be returned to U.S. control. His stated reason was that it's necessary to monitor China's nuclear facilities over the border in Xinjiang province.
And he didn't just ask nicely.
No, he tied it to a severe public threat. Posted on social media saying, and I quote, "Bad things are going to happen." All caps, multiple exclamation points if the base isn't handed back.
Wow. How did that go down?
Predictably, it drew immediate and firm lines in the sand. The Taliban, who currently control Afghanistan and the base, flatly rejected the ultimatum. They cited Afghan sovereignty and argued the demand violates the 2020 Doha Agreement that set the terms for the U.S. withdrawal.
And China's reaction.
Crucially, China publicly backed the Taliban's rejection. They condemned the U.S. demand as an attempt to stir up regional tensions.
So what's the read on this? What's the strategy?
Well, analysts mostly see it as an attempt by the Trump administration to reassert a strategic U.S. footprint in Central Asia, directly linking regional stability, or instability, to the perceived threat from China's growing nuclear arsenal. But, the risk is it alienates potential partners in the region and arguably gives China more justification for its own security buildup there.
Meanwhile, over in Europe, tensions between NATO and Russia are definitely not cooling down. If anything, they're heating up over these repeated aggressive airspace violations.
Yeah, and this isn't just rhetoric anymore. We're talking tangible military provocations. Estonia, a NATO member bordering Russia, has formally requested consultations with NATO allies under Article 4 of the North Atlantic Treaty.
Okay, Article 4. Remind us what that means.
Article 4 is the mechanism a NATO member uses when it feels its territorial integrity, political independence, or security is threatened. Estonia invoked it after Russian military jets repeatedly violated its airspace. They called the incursions unprecedented and brazen.
And these weren't isolated incidents.
Not at all. Around the same time, both the German Air Force and Britain's Royal Air Force, the RAF, had to scramble their fighter jets over the Baltic Sea and near Poland.
Why? What triggered that?
It followed a large-scale Russian aerial assault on Ukraine involving drones. Apparently, some of those Russian drones strayed into, or very close to, Allied airspace, forcing NATO to react and visibly bolster its air defense posture all along that eastern flank.
The immediate risk there is just miscalculation, isn't it?
Hugely. With Russian forces operating so aggressively, so close to NATO borders, the chances of an accidental clash, maybe due to a navigation error, a system malfunction, or just edgy pilots, it's dangerously high right now.
And rounding out this rather grim picture, there was also a failure on the nuclear diplomacy front.
Yes. Talks between the U.S., Russia, and China aimed at finding some common ground on arms control seem to have completely stalled. They failed to break the current impasse.
Which puts the future of the New START treaty at risk.
It certainly does. New START is the last major nuclear arms control treaty remaining between the U.S. and Russia, and it's already under strain. This failure to engage China meaningfully just adds to the risk that we could be heading towards a period of completely unrestrained nuclear competition among the major powers.
And compounding that, Iran made a move.
Yeah, compounding that sort of regression in arms control, Iran announced it was halting cooperation with the IAEA, the International Atomic Energy Agency, the UN's nuclear watchdog.
Why now? What prompted that?
It came immediately after the main Western European powers involved in the original Iran nuclear deal, it's Britain, France, and Germany, triggered what's called the snapback mechanism for sanctions.
Okay, the snapback. We need to unpack that. What does that actually mean under the old 2015 nuclear deal, the JCPOA, Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action?
Right, the snapback was a crucial enforcement clause built into the JCPOA.
Yeah.
It essentially allowed any of the original signatories to unilaterally reimpose all the pre-2015 United Nations sanctions against Iran if they determined Iran was significantly violating the terms of the deal.
So by triggering it, Europe basically reset the clock on sanctions.
They did. They reimposed a whole raft of UN sanctions that had been lifted as part of the deal.
Yeah.
And Iran's immediate response was to withdraw critical oversight access for IAEA inspectors to parts of its nuclear program. It effectively plunges the whole situation back into a deep crisis with much less transparency.
Wow. So you've got nuclear talks failing, NATO-Russia tensions sky high, and Iran pulling back from nuclear oversight.
It really underscores a profound and quite worrying step backwards in international stability and cooperation right now.
Okay, let's turn now to a U.S. policy shift that sent immediate shockwaves, internationally really, this massive sudden change to the H-1B visa program.
Yeah, this one caused instant panic. We're talking about the visas used primarily for highly skilled foreign workers, especially in the tech sector.
So what exactly happened?
President Trump signed a proclamation imposing a new, frankly staggering, $100,000 one-time fee on new H-1B visa applications.
$100,000 per visa.
Per new application, yes, one time. Now, to put that in context, the previous system involved a lottery registration fee of just $215.
Wow.
And even with lawyer fees and everything else, the total filing costs for an H-1B were typically maybe in the range of $2,000 to $5,000. So going from that to $100,000, it's an exponential, almost punitive increase.
What's the administration's stated reason for such a drastic move?
The official line is protecting American jobs. Driving up the cost significantly is meant to discourage companies from hiring foreign workers over potentially available American workers.
But critics are saying it's more about politics than economics.
That's the core argument against it, yes. That it's protectionism driven more by political rhetoric aimed at a specific voter base rather than a sound economic strategy.
And the immediate economic impact on U.S. companies.
It's immediate and potentially devastating, especially for tech companies that rely heavily on H-1Bs. Initial estimates are suggesting the combined annual bill for employers, think Microsoft, Amazon, Google, but also thousands of smaller startups could hit somewhere around $14 billion a year.
$14 billion. Where does that money come from?
Well, that's the question. Those costs are almost certainly going to either be passed back to the employees themselves in some form, making U.S. jobs less attractive, or perhaps more strategically concerning for the U.S. economy. It could strongly incentivize companies to simply move those jobs offshore. Hire the same talent, but base them in places like Canada or Europe where they can access global skilled workers without this enormous prohibitive tax.
And then the human cost. We heard reports of chaos, especially in India.
Immense human cost. India is the largest source country for H-1B holders, and the suddenness and scale of this change caused mass confusion and anxiety. There was immediate uncertainty. Would this be an annual fee? Would it affect people already here on visas?
Right.
The level of panic, particularly in tech hubs like Mumbai and Hyderabad, was reportedly extreme. We saw stories of current H-1B holders in India scrambling, spending upwards of $8,000 on emergency last-minute plane tickets just to fly back to the U.S. immediately.
Why the rush?
They were terrified they might get locked out by some sudden new rule interpretation or a policy deadline they didn't know about. There was just so much confusion. The Indian government actually issued statements warning that this policy could have severe humanitarian consequences, thinking about families potentially being separated, individuals facing huge financial burdens overnight.
It's striking because this policy directly targets the very visa program that was instrumental in building Silicon Valley and staffing so much of the U.S. tech industry.
It absolutely does. And the debate really centers on whether this is a necessary correction, as the administration claims, or if it's, as critics argue, driven more by political messaging than by any long-term strategic economic thinking about innovation and competitiveness. #TagTag2, the Charlie Kirk Memorial, and political rhetoric.
Okay. Moving from policy to the intersection of politics, culture, and activism. There was a very high-profile memorial service held recently for the conservative activist Charlie Kirk.
That's right. Held in Arizona at the State Farm Stadium, a huge venue. Reports suggested expectations of up to 100,000 attendees, and it featured major political figures, including President Trump and Senator J.D. Vance.
And given the current political climate, there were security concerns.
Yes, unfortunately. The heightened tensions were pretty evident. An armed man was actually arrested at the venue before the event. He was reportedly carrying a gun, a knife, and had expired law enforcement credentials. He was charged with impersonating law enforcement.
Wow, that underscores the tension. But beyond the security, the rhetoric surrounding the event itself was quite notable.
Extremely notable. The way Kirk was spoken about, both at the service and by prominent figures commenting on it, really elevated him beyond just an activist. There was a strong element of framing him almost as a religious martyr figure.
In what way?
Well, for instance, Cardinal Timothy Dolan, a very senior Catholic figure, publicly referred to Kirk as a modern-day St. Paul.
St. Paul? What?
Yeah. And it wasn't just Catholic figures. A prominent cleric from the Russian Orthodox Church, Metropolitan Tikhon, also issued a statement honoring Kirk's martyric death for, quote, defending his beliefs.
That kind of language conflating political activism, however influential, with religious martyrdom.
It really underscores the intense polarization, doesn't it? How political divides are increasingly being framed in almost religious good versus evil terms in parts of the U.S. political landscape.
And we're seeing hints that this polarization might be bleeding into the actual institutions of government, like the justice system.
There are certainly concerns being raised along those lines. For example, President Trump recently appointed Lindsay Halligan, who was one of his former attorneys during his legal battles, to lead a key federal prosecutor's office.
Okay.
And perhaps more pointedly, he publicly urged the current U.S. Attorney General, Pam Bondi, to bring charges against specific political opponents. He explicitly named Democratic Senator Adam Schiff and New York's Attorney General Letitia James, both of whom have been thorns in his side.
And the concern there is?
Critics immediately voiced deep concern that this signals a potential move towards using the Justice Department for political retribution, for revenge prosecutions against opponents. That obviously raises fundamental questions about the independence of the judicial branch from political influence. #3, economic signals and consumer burden.
Okay, let's turn now to a really sharp economic paradox that's emerging in the U.S., specifically looking at the state of Pennsylvania.
Yes, Pennsylvania.
Yeah.
A major producer of natural gas thanks to all the fracking operations there over the last decade or so.
Right. And the original promise of fracking, at least partly, was energy independence for the U.S. and, crucially for residents, lower domestic energy bills, right?
That was definitely a big part of the sales pitch, yes.
Yeah.
Abundant, cheap, local energy.
But the reality for Pennsylvanians seems to be the opposite.
It really does. Despite Pennsylvania exporting massive quantities of natural gas, residents within the state have seen their average electricity bills surge. They're up by 31% just since 2020.
Wait, why the paradox? If they're producing so much gas right there, why are their bills going up so much?
It seems to be down to two main factors. One, the state's electricity generation has become heavily reliant on natural gas. It now makes up about 60% of their energy mix, so they're very exposed to gas prices.
Okay.
And two, that locally produced Pennsylvania gas isn't just staying local anymore. It's competing on the global energy market. So domestic prices are increasingly being driven by international demand and geopolitical events, not just local abundance.
And this has real consequences for people.
Severe consequences. The number of households having their electricity disconnected because they couldn't pay the bills has soared up 25% just between 2023 and 2024. We're talking about significant energy poverty, which brings all sorts of health and safety risks, especially during heat waves or cold snaps.
Yeah, the fracking boom didn't deliver lower bills for locals, quite the opposite. Now, this kind of economic pressure or retrenchment, it isn't just a U.S. thing, is it? We saw similar moves in Europe.
No, definitely not just the U.S. We saw Germany, for example, make significant cuts to its international aid and development budget, an 8% cut overall.
And specifically hitting emergency aid.
Yeah, emergency humanitarian aid was slashed by 50%.
Yeah.
A huge cut.
What are the potential global impacts of a major donor like Germany pulling back like that?
Aid organizations around the world are sounding serious alarms. They warn that these kinds of cuts, especially to emergency aid, risk severe humanitarian crises worsening. Their estimates suggest over 4 million additional people could face food shortages, and maybe 1.5 million could lose access to basic health care globally as a direct result of these German budget cuts.
It really shows a concerning trend, perhaps, of major economies prioritizing internal budget issues over long-standing international aid commitments?
It seems to point that way, yes. Fiscal austerity at home potentially impacting stability abroad.
Okay, but despite all these economic stresses, geopolitical tensions, Wall Street seems remarkably cheerful.
Slight chuckle. Yeah, Wall Street strategists, on the whole, remain surprisingly optimistic. There's a strong sentiment, widely reported, that the S&P 500 stock index can keep climbing. even from its recent record highs.
What's the reasoning? Aren't high markets usually a time for caution?
The argument seems to be that the underlying structure of the market has changed. You hear phrases like, "This is not your grandfather's S&P 500."
Meaning?
Meaning, they believe the current market strength is driven by factors that make it more resilient than in the past. Things like the dominance of highly profitable tech companies, efficiency gains across industries, maybe more stable corporate earnings overall. They seem to think it can defy the traditional cycles of boom and bust, even with interest rate concerns lingering. Time will tell on that one, of course.
Indeed. Okay, one final domestic policy item, this one from California, aimed at policing.
Yes, a notable new state law was enacted there that bans most law enforcement officers from wearing masks or other facial coverings while they're on duty.
And that includes federal agents, too.
Yes, the law specifically includes federal officers operating in California, like those from ICE Immigration and Customs Enforcement.
What's the stated goal of this law?
The clear intent is to increase transparency and accountability. The idea is that officers should be clearly identifiable by face, by name tag, by badge number, especially during protests or confrontations. It's meant to reduce anonymity, which proponents argue can sometimes lead to misconduct.
But there's pushback.
Oh, absolutely. Fierce debate. Law enforcement groups and their supporters raise serious concerns about officer safety. They argue that exposing officers' identities, especially in potentially volatile situations or when dealing with organized crime or extremist groups, puts the officers and potentially their families at significant risk. It's a real clash between demands for transparency and concerns about operational safety. #Neutrino.
So we have covered an immense amount of ground today. We've gone from tracing the literal cosmic origins of gold,
Driven by neutrinos.
driven by elusive neutrinos, right, to identifying potential signs of past life on Mars, and then plunged right into the chaos of cyber attacks, crippling airports, and these incredibly volatile domestic policy debates like the H-1B visa changes.
Yeah, the central tension running through this whole deep dive feels really undeniable, doesn't it?
Mm-hmm.
On one hand, humanity is achieving these just unprecedented scientific and technological things. We're entangling atomic nuclei to build quantum computers. We're designing smart factories that eliminate errors.
Mm-hmm.
But at the exact same time, we seem to be witnessing this striking regression in global stability and cooperation. You see it with Iran halting nuclear oversight. You see it in the escalating NATO vigilance against Russia, and you definitely see it in the, frankly, self-inflicted chaos caused by something like that $100,000 H-1B visa fee in the U.S.
And the connection to you listening to this feels pretty profound because all that technological acceleration we talked about, it demands global talent. It demands seamless global communication and collaboration.
Right.
Yet political decisions like imposing a sudden, almost impossibly high fee on the very skilled workers who drive innovation seem to be actively constraining that flow of talent, like intellectual capacity. It feels like it directly threatens the future innovation we spent the first half of this dive discussing.
Which leaves us, I think, with a pretty provocative final thought for you to maybe mull over this week. We've detailed how we're using incredibly advanced technology from AI in manufacturing to deep space telescopes to solve complex, objective problems, often with amazing scientific rigor.
Yeah.
But if a nation's most pressing policy decisions with huge economic and human consequences, like that monumental $100,000 visa fee, seem to be driven more by short-term political rhetoric, maybe ideological purity, rather than by long-term strategic economic necessity, are we actually leveraging our collective brainpower effectively? Or are we, in some fundamental way, mismanaging the very progress our science and technology are achieving?
That is definitely something to think about. Are we managing progress or tripping over our own political feet?
Something to consider as you look at the headlines this week.
Indeed. Thanks for joining us for this deep dive. We'll see you next time.
For enjoying Artificially Informed.
Hit subscribe and share it with a friend.
From the left, the right, and straight from the algorithm.
Thank you.
That's it for today's Artificially Informed.
Nope. Thanks for spending your time with us.
Yeah.
Stay sharp, stay curious. See you next time.